All right, we're back up. We're live. Articles in the chat. Hopefully, people understand what's going on. Um, so, this is the second part of the article from August 29th, 1977. The Buckley Family, Part 2, Wall Street Fabians and the Conservative Movement. We're talking about how the Catholic right in the United States was taken away um, by this Wall Street family, the Buckley family that worked underneath Rockefeller oil interests, what the Treasury Department underneath FDR in internal investigations and other intelligence apparatus at that time described as the Synarchus network of banks in internal documents. Um, how that American Catholicism has been taken, and also the Christian right, which we'll look into later, has been taken and aligned with people like Otto von Habsburg and other Fabian type movements in Europe, um, basically to destroy the United States, destroy the patriotic Catholics that used to be here, and turn them towards neoconservatism. Um, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just watch this entire series, and you'll start to get an idea. I have a lot of other things on Otto Habsburg, etc. I've talked about it exhaustively, so here we go. All right, the right and left Fabian origins of the National Review Group as his magazine. In 1950-52, at least three of Buckley's children, William F. Reed, and Priscilla, followed directly into their father's tracks to receive training for the future direction of the Rockefeller satrapy as employees of the Central Intelligence Agency. Referring to William F. Buckley's recruitment by E. Howard Hunt, of one of the top Rockefeller covert action men who was involved in setting up the dummy assassination against President John F. Kennedy. If you remember, I think it was either William F. Buckley Sr. or Jr. who hired George de Morgenschildt, who was in the a prominent individual in the Romanovs' Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia palace. They had a palace in New York City where George de Morgenschildt reported to, as well as there's rumors that he brought Oswald there. Anyway, it's always interesting. This is the ROCOR uh, contingent that ends up joining the World Anti-Communist League, and this is kind of where something that Jay Dyer won't talk about. It might be the reason why he doesn't really want to focus on the CNP and all of these individuals, is because these groups are all aligning themselves with Dugan and the anti-United States movement, now being led by people like Dugan and Steve Bannon. Um, that's more or less centered in the old Guelph oligarchy as well as in England. Uh, so going on, and later was to head the Watergate Dirty Tricks operation. This was E. Howard Hunt, brought in by William F. Buckley. Operations to sabotage the Nixon administration break with Wall Street recalled. When I got into the CIA assignment to set up CIA station in Mexico, actually the CIA Latin American Division HQ, Bill Buckley was the first person I thought to bring in. He accepted immediately. In fact, the decision was not so informal. Buckley was a member of the Rockefeller private intelligence apparatus, at whose core is a covert action capability that is coordinated for the purposes of assassinations, terrorism, and even coups by international private intelligence body known as Interpol, and by the government agencies Interpol has infiltrated. Often misidentified as Die Spinna, Odessa, the Black International, the Interpol network is staffed by laundered operatives from Nazis' Third Reich and by members of British intelligence, white Russian networks, that's ROCOR folks, who have been augmented by a second generation recruited from post-war World War II monetarist dictated covert operations that includes the secret army organization OAS, Ordina Nuovo, Cuban exile paramilitary groups. We talked about them in the last video. Kinds of people around Rubio and McCain that blew up jetliners and set car bombs off in Miami and Washington, D.C., Latin America death squads, etc. Despite their respectable conservative image, William F. Buckley and family are major officers in this Rockefeller Nazi connection, just as a key element of Marcus Raskin and Richard Barnett's Institute for Policy Studies. Power base is a lumpen gutter elements they have organized into terrorist groupings like the Weather Underground, Japanese Red Army, Black Liberation Army, etc. So the Buckley's usefulness is in large part attributable to those Interpol coordinated Nazi and Catholic fascist assets which William F. Buckley Sr. first began acquiring. So he's talking about Interpol. This is Interpol back in the 1970s, as it interfaced with like the Galen organization, all of this. Um, Both these left and Nazi networks, as we will show, share common Fabian origins, supporting one another's terrorist operations or else pitted against each other in surrogate warfare. Through especially the Russell Sage Foundation, the leading private intelligence think tanks in the Wilson to Roosevelt period, those top agents include Walter Lippmann, John Dewey, etc. Simultaneous deployments occurred to set the basis for the Fabianization of America. Remember, Walter Lippmann was the Fabian that founded the Council of Foreign Relations. John Dewey was the guy that reformed our education system, which was previously more of a Prussian and uniquely American system. A lot of French influence in there from the École Polytechnique, and was destroyed by John Dewey and pragmatism. The basis of Fabianization of America and the Versailles Treaties negotiations, which initiated the process by which monetarist agents, Hjalmar Schacht, later brought Hitler to power. It was this same liberal institution which served as the chief Rockefeller instrument to found Interpol, which was directed by SS leaders Heydrich and Kaltenbrunner during the 1930s. Under the rubric of major Cold War escalation in 1950, William F. Buckley Jr. joined the CIA Deputy Director for Plans, Alan Dulles, who had previously worked with Nelson Rockefeller from the 1943 turning point of the World War II to launder Nazi Latin America and others say, I don't know, they blanked this out in copying process. Nazi Latin American and other safe haven in infiltrating these former enemies of America into the embryonic U.S. intelligence establishment. With government cover, they became anti-communist shock troop as Wall Street advanced the timetable for a planned preventative war following the heels of the Soviets' first atomic bomb explosion, the loss of China, and the failure of the Marshall Plan and related Atlanticist intelligence operations to consolidate parts of Europe. As Fabian networks were jettisoned from policymaking posts in Fabian bipartisan deal, was struck with the Rockefeller wing of the GOP, the Truman administration was mobilized for military confrontation with China. Then the Soviet Union via a Korean War beachhead. Interpol Nazi teams were to be simultaneously thrown into the breach in the West with the literal paramilitary invasions of Eastern Europe, planned while Alan Dulles sacrificed elements of his left Fabian operatives, centered upon Noel Field to spread the paranoid delusion in the Kremlin that the entire East Bloc leadership had been penetrated by Anglo-American agents. Apart from the family's assets that the Buckley children brought with them into the CIA, they served as a bridge between the Ivy League group that consolidated control of key executive posts in the agency and conservative line officers, hoodwinking the latter into acceptance of brutal and stupid Wall Street policy. In Spain, the only post-World War II hub of Nazi Interpol activity, second only to... No, the post-World... Yeah, not the only. The post-World War II hub of Nazi Interpol activity, think Otto Habsburg, Leon de Grelle, Hjalmar Schacht, who married into these circles, his daughter, and Otto Skorzeny. Second only to Vienna, Habsburg, F. Reed Buckley served as liaison with the Franco regime, which had provided a base of operations to such key Rockefeller operatives as SS Colonel Otto Scarface Skorzeny, the son-in-law of Wall Street's financial technician Hjalmar Schacht, and former head of Hitler's Special Operations Team. Others with whom F. Reed and a member of Franco's Phalange from his youth was in contact, including Leon de Grelle of Belgian Rexists, did not die a Catholic, died a pagan, vitiate war criminals who later helped found the OAS, that was used by the Kennedy administration to destabilize France and run a series of assassination attempts against President de Gaulle and Ant Pavelic, the infamous butcher from the Nazis' puppet independent state of Croatia, whose Ustashi secret police and their offspring have been involved in the recent wave of U.S. based terrorism in 1977. It was William F. Buckley Jr.'s job to help Howard Hunt weave these Nazi elements into Latin American CIA division and Rockefeller private networks. William F. Jr., William F. Buckley Jr., was also been in regular secret contact with Nazi organizations headquartered in Spain, together with Wilmore Kendall, a former left Fabian who became top-level CIA and State Department Latin American officer, and then Buckley's mentor at Yale. William F. Buckley traveled frequently to meetings of the European Center for Documentation, EDCI, whose titular chairman, Otto von Habsburg, has been half seriously proposed by some Buckleyites as a North American ruler. All of these fake Catholic networks are constantly trying to rewrite the United States Constitution towards a federalist system. This is something that Conrad Black had proposed. This is something that Hutchins and that idiot neo-Aristotelian, I can't think of his name, from who helped found the Great Books program. All of these individuals do this, and they're doing it today as well. I mean, what's his face? The Constitution Party, Charles Coulomb is proposing this. The ECDI, this is the European Center for Documentation's biannual meetings, provided cover for Buckley to arrange secret meetings with Scorzani and others where final marching orders can be given to these Nazi Interpol waves of terror. In 1952, the year that Buckley ostensibly retired from the agency, these networks were ready for deployment as part of the Dulles brothers' brinksmanship, liberation, rollback, and massive retaliation policies. Under this potentially disastrous bluff strategy, Rockefeller's Nazi International was used. One, to invade East Berlin, part of the so-called Berlin Uprising that played upon the economic disparities of window-dressing German economic miracle. Two, to consolidate the 1952 coup of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, as well as the 1953 coup that overthrew Mossadegh in Iran, which was jointly coordinated for the Seven Sisters oil companies by CIA, Officer Kermit Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover Jr., with the aid of Buckleyite Miles Copeland. 3. To carry out the 1954 coup in Guatemala, which was coordinated by E. Howard Hunt and planned by Tracy Barnes from the offices of the United Fruit Company. That's underneath the mega group member Max Fisher. Greatly involved with funding these right-wing terrorist networks, but also the Maritime Fruit Company, which is the sister company, was funding left-wing terrorist networks. That's operated out of Israel, I believe, to which he was closely linked by his marriage into the Rockefeller family. Since his official retirement, Buckley has remained at the command center of Nazi Interpol networks, especially during the high point of their use in the Kennedy era and again in the last few years. As part of their insane brinksmanship policies, the Kennedys massively deployed the Nazi network for repeated and sometimes successful assassination attempts against recalcitrant allies like France's de Gaulle's and Canada's Diefenbacher, and against third world leaders like Fidel Castro, Patrice Lumumba, and others. E. Howard Hunt and numerous other Buckleyite agents were especially key in organizing the Cuban exile and related networks used for these operations. A grid of Buckley's recent travels with Wall Street agent Lieutenant General Vernon Walters, for example, places him in every recent terrorist hotspot, including Greece, where the same Nazi IPS networks involved in the assassination of CIA officer Richard Welk went on joint deployment to destabilize the Karamanlis government. Immediately after their arrival, the Caribbean were simultaneous to the Buckley-Walters visit. Orlando Bosch's Cuban terrorist umbrella group, CORU, bombed an Air Cubana flight, killing 70 passengers. Chile, where they met with officials of the Chilean junta and its secret police arm, DINA, and Spain, where Buckley met secretly with participants at the Paris World Anti-Communist League, conference, including several CIA station chiefs, to give them final marching orders for a wave of assassinations and bombings that followed in Spain, France, and Italy by both right and left organizations. I mentioned Otto Habsburg and Leon de Grauw, these people, were initially trying to plan a coup against Franco on behalf of the Carlists. These people have no loyalty. They are only seeking and only allowed to seek destabilization of countries. That's why people who give into fascist sympathies are uh, hopelessly fooled. These are simply used, just like the Jacobin Terror was controlled by Jacques Necker's friends um, through his daughter, Madame de Stael, in her salons. Just like Napoleon's brother controlled the Carbonari, in which Napoleon was brought in to take out. Um, it's the same kind of idea that's constantly being used. Uh, France and Italy by both right and left organizations. Along with Kourou and remnants of OAS, the chief instrument of the terror assault was the Ordine Nuovo, whose creation the Buckley family had helped bankroll as a second generation arm of the Malmo International, headed by top operatives as Scorzani and right wing Fabian Society member and Union of Fascist leaders Sir Oswald Mosley. And if you remember the Chesterton Hamsworth Circle, these people were simultaneously listening to in the Hamsworth family, who were commissioned by British intelligence special operation executive to propagandize to Canadian Catholics in Quebec to support British geopolitical strategy. The Hamsworths were simultaneously getting the spiritual guru mentorship of Peter Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, who was the mentor of the Fabian circles, while also supporting uh, G.K. Chesterton's cousin, um, and also supporting Oswald Mosley at the same time. All these circles were sleeping together. Okay. Another major component of these Interpol networks, especially in Iberian Peninsula and Latin America, is Opus Dei and assorted other Catholic fascist groups, in which the Buckley's brother-in-law L. Brent Bozell, the family that founded Boys Town, involved in the pedophilia scandal, which we've revealed on this channel, at the Franklin Federal Credit Union scandal, running boys to neoconservatives. Um, L. Brent Bozell is a leader, I guess, in Opus Dei. One, it is Opus Dei together with Nazi escapees and such death squads as Brazil's Tradition, Family, and Property. I've tied them to the Morena organization, the PAN party, as well as groups in Venezuela, and the Argentina Anti-Communist Alliance that were used by Wall Street agents to topple the Allende government in 1973 and to impose subsequent fascist authority called for by Buckleyite Milton Friedman's shock treatment prescription, in addition to the World Anti-Communist League, which has become dominant by Latin fascist groups. An important regional coordinating body for these groups is the American-Chilean Committee, founded by two Buckleyites, Spruell Braden and Marvin Liebman. The Fabian Connection. Drawing upon the personnel and methods of the British Fabian Society, William F. Buckley's founded National Review in 1954 to permeate conservative layers with the monetarist American Century doctrine. With its editorial offices stuffed by ex-Fabians, the magazine has towed the line on every tactical and strategic variation upon Atlanticist call for post-World War II American empire. Sounds like the project for a new American century. Sounds like a repeat there. The principal architects of this policy included such top Fabian individuals and institutions as Walter Lippmann, the chief spokesman for Anglo-American bankers during the Wilson and Roosevelt administration, and the Brookings Institution, the main Atlanticist think tank, even still today, developing the means of corporatist social control. The American Century Doctrine was conduited into Republican Party ranks in only slightly altered form by the Dulles brothers, who served simultaneously as Secretary of State and Director of Central Intelligence Agency under the Eisenhower administration, and by Henry Luce, founder of the Rockefeller Finance Time Life Fortune chain. Oh, but E. Michael Jones, you know, They're the ones that introduced the American proposition that the American Revolution was good, but the French Revolution was bad, and it's only Henry Luce that was bad. And we should look at the solidarists and the European fascist networks as good, um, which was the main mouthpiece for such Wall Street Republicans and Wendell Willkie and Thomas Dewey at the time. Under this broad policy outlined in command structure, National Review was assigned the task throughout most of the 1950s to undermine the optimism with which industrialist and proto-Whig forces emerged from the war, and to transform them into malleable anti-communist allies of Wall Street. These neo-isolationists, led by Senator Robert Taft, a Republican from Ohio, and other spokesmen for America's revitalized industrial sector, who refused to be brainwashed by National Review's echo of the cry for empire, preventative war, and liberation rollback, soon found their machines infiltrated and factionalized, and heard themselves tarred as being hopelessly irresponsible. It was National Review's assignment to subvert the Republican tradition represented by those so-called neo-isolationists. While these proto-Whig leaders lacked the conceptual tools to supplant the Atlanticist doctrine with a program for international progress and development, they were the only potentially viable political force in America at the time which recognized that it was not the United States' moral duty to impose the same colonialist rule upon the world that the British Rothschild agents sought to reimpose upon our own nation in the 19th century. So think of people like General MacArthur. Not a communist, but definitely did not want British rule to be the answer to communist rule. Along with other Whigs, Taft resoundingly denounced those Atlanticists who, like Henry Luce and Henry Stimson, seemed to contemplate an Anglo-American alliance perpetually ruling the world. Such imperialism is wholly foreign to our ideals of democracy and freedom. It is not manifest destiny of our natural destiny. On his return to Mexico, William F. Buckley used his father's ties to America First Committee. Oh, but E. Michael Jones and that gay boy, what's his name? Somebody in the chat. What's his name? Anybody in the chat know his name? The gay boy, Catholic boy, America First. Gee whiz! Now I gotta Jimmy Neutron and think this. Man, he likes cat boys. I'm not joking. This is a Catholic, the Groiper guy, Nick Fuentes. Yeah, America First, also being run by this Hutchins guy that we were talking about. That was a complete scam, run by Anglo-American establishment. So, on his return from Mexico, William F. Buckley used his father's ties to the American First Committee, where he had been close to Wall Street faction headed by Joseph Kennedy Sr., Chester Bowles, and Dulles brothers, to insinuate himself into a variety of conservative networks preparatory to creating National Review. And the whole base of America First is we have this contingent that if the British are capable of defeating the Nazis, this contingent that'll say, we're going to let the British do whatever they want. And that's why America First is idiot level politics. And then now it's being promoted today as the America's answer to the world. And it's actually been promoted on behalf of the Russians and the Russian Messianic idea, which is quite willing to work with with what's left of the British Empire today, the British Commonwealth. From this base, Buckley and his brother-in-law Brent Bozell joined with other future founders of National Review to become important controllers of Joseph McCarthy. Roy Cohn, anyone? The psychological warfare mouthpiece for the monetarist policy of preventative war via Korea. McCarthy had been programmed for this anti-communist crusade by Georgetown University associates of Carroll Quigley, author of The Atlanticist History of Monetarism, Tragedy, and Hope. While Brent Bozell served as the ghostwriter for McCarthy, William F. Buckley was given immediate entry to McCarthyite circles with the 1950 publication of his book, God and Man at Yale, which touched off the Yale Red Scare and was blasted by McGeorge Bundy and other Eastern establishment liberals. When the Soviets exploded a deployable hydrogen bomb before the U.S., forcing even the most psychotic preventative warriors to accept de escalation of Korea into a no win conflict, Buckley and associates served to contain McCarthy, who had broken control in the process of being jettisoned by Wall Street. At this juncture, McCarthy had formed a dangerous alliance with members of the House Select Committee on Endowed Foundations, the Reese Committee. I'll give people like Tim Kelly and Michael Jones credit because they do talk about this, I believe, which was laying bare the entire web of foundations behind the massive web of Rockefeller Fabian networks, of which Alger Hiss, etc., and others were merely a fragment. Under the influence of Staff Director Norman Dodd and others, McCarthy was preparing to attack not only the Bundys, but also Dulles Brothers and other Atlanticist hardliners for their continued behind the scenes work with those left wing operatives whom McCarthy mistakenly identified as communists. In their short book, McCarthy and His Enemies, published shortly after McCarthy's censure, Buckley and Bosel systematically covered up this massive web of Fabian treason, leading directly to Rockefeller's doorstep that the Reese Committee exposed. So once McCarthy had outlived his usefulness, he was disposed of. This happens to a lot of people that are lauded as heroes by the conservative movement. With the founding of National Review in 1954 to carry out McCarthyite psychological warfare thrust under totally controlled conditions, Buckley pulled together the strands of the ex-Fabian operatives whom he had encountered during his periods of shopping around. The following three individuals, James Burnham and Frank Meyer, epitomized the top-flight Fabian agents who formed the magazine's leadership core, as the record with National Review makes clear. They were neither Fabian turncoats nor miraculously reborn conservatives, as many have charged, but the first wave of a conscious redeployment of Fabian agents into right-wing layers to peddle Wall Street's plans for empire. Is someone similar can be like Newt Gingrich, who was a disciple of the Fabian futurist Alvin Toffler and based his entire, I think Newt Gingrich had the original Make America Great Again program. That entire thing was based off of Alvin Toffler idea of the third wave, which somehow was morphed into a conservative movement, basically of dumping Social Security. So it's fiscal conservatism, which people mistake for real conservatism. And it's all anti-industrial, but pro-corporate. That's why we have a increasing trade deficit, but an increasing financial rentier finance and services industry in the United States. Max Eastman was the first. Okay, so this is going into these agents that we just mentioned. Eastman was the first old guard Fabian agent to associate with Buckley, serving as gatekeeper for a dozen odd left Fabians, metamorphosized overnight after a light McCarthyite sheep dipping. Eastman was also one of the inner circle of the agents who planned the founding of National Review group of agents with Buckley. A book could be profitably written on Eastman's career as a left Fabian agent. Certain highlights are given here to show the similarities between his they put this correcting tape on here and it doesn't make any sense. I guess he links the Comintern and in later methods employed by Tory National Review Group against proto-Whigs from 1950s onwards. Eastman and Sidney Hook, author another future Buckleyite neoconservative, were among the first whom John Dewey, Walter Lippmann, and others of the Russell Sage Foundation recruited as field hands for their schemes to Fabianize America. It was in the League of Women's Suffrage, a Russell Sage pilot project run by his sister Crystal Eastman, that young Max got his first agent training. He soon graduated to Fabian inner circles around Lippmann in the Socialist Party, through whom he was put in charge of several theoretical journals, New Review, The Masses, The Liberator, that were used to foment splits in socialist camp and introduce synthetic ideologies created by the British Fabian Society colleagues. Among those major operations, which Eastman, also the principal Fabian profiler of Leon Trotsky, helped initiate, were pitting Stalin implicatably against Trotsky through the publication of quote unquote Lenin's will in the New York Times. Second, winning Trotsky's approval for the liquidation of communist underground in the U.S., a scheme which was intended and succeeded in paving the way for a seizure of the party by Fabian agent J. Lovestone, now with the AFL-CIO. Eastman then joined Lovestone, who would later lead a major split in the U.S. communist movement under Eastman's influences, to draft the program of above-ground Workers' Party, and three, help push a final split between Trotsky and Stalin, then joining Max Schachtman to form the Trotskyite Communist League breakaway faction from the U.S. Communists. Current evidences indicate that Eastman, who finally denounced Trotsky a few months before Trotsky's murder, joined with James Burham, Sidney Hook, and others to plan the Trotsky assassination, which was carried out by Fabian networks grouped around Santiago Carrillo and the Comintern. Now, this nun that was part of the sociology circles around Berdyaev, who I forget her name now. I got to look her up because this is important. She was actually involved in this. Maria Skoptsova became a major Russian Orthodox saint figure when she moved to. So here's a communist that is mad at Trotsky and plots Trotsky's assassination. Now, she obviously isn't successful, but and then moves to Paris and becomes this major Russian Orthodox saint. Typical of what you see from the weirdo Rocor networks, the synthetic Rocor networks that make up their part in the joint venture of the World Anti-Communist League. So the Trotsky assassination, which was carried out by Fabian networks grouped around Santiago Carrillo in the Comintern. Eastman, who wrote a Stalin Did It cover story for the Reader's Digest in 1940, was already plugged into those white Russian networks used for earlier attempts to assassinate Lenin and Trotsky. Like I say, Maria Skoptsova, part of the Berdyaev salons, where a lot of the Rocor emigre come out of. In addition to his work as a reborn conservative for Reader's Digest and American Mercury, where he first met William Buckley, Eastman had become a leader in two other networks from which he was recruited, ex-Fabians to the National Review. First, the Time Life Fortune chain, where he served as a foreign affairs advisor to Clare Booth Luce and board member of the American China Policy Association. Remember, Clare Luce was doing acid with John Courtney Murray, the Jesuit. And two, the American Committee for Cultural Freedom, part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, one of the first right-wing social democratic predecessors for such human rights organizations as Amnesty International and Freedom House, where Buckleyites and left Fabians meet to plot tactics on these issues. Among those whom Eastman helped recruit for National Review were a former assistant director of the Soviets' TASS news agency, a former editor-in-chief of the German Party's theoretical journal, Die Rote Fahne, a former member of CP-USA Intelligence, a former leader of New York Times Communist Cell, a former leader of the 2.5 International founded by Beatrice and Sidney Webb, the founders of London School of Economics, on behalf of the Fabians, and major funders of New Age magazine, which Chesterton A.R. Orridge came out of. The former chief theoretician of Lovestone faction of the CP-USA and others. Eastman personally went into hibernation on the board of National Review when U.S. conservatives refused to swallow the pragmatism of John Dewey that he dished up in articles. So that was a list of people that he recruited to the National Review magazine. James Burham, and I know this name from other places. This is an interesting family, and there's more on this guy after this 1977 article that gets really crazy. Burham is the main geopolitical strategist for National Review, writing column that in its transformation from the Atlanticist Third World War days following World War II to their protracted conflict has followed every fascist nuance of Wall Street policy. Son of British Railroad executive Burham did his graduate work under a Jesuit priest at Balliol College, England, then returned to the U.S. in 1929 as a professor of Thomism medieval philosophy at New York University's Washington Square College. Under the spiritual guidance of Fabian agent Sidney Hook, Burnham underwent a Damascus Road conversion to accept the dictatorship of the proletariat and became a leader of a string of Trotskyite organizations. The American Workers' Party, Communist League, Socialist Workers' Party, simultaneously splitting the Fourth International and using it as a lever against the Comintern. With his credibility finally shattered by Trotsky, whose last polemics blasted him, and Fabian Confederates, Burnham used the opportunity of the Hitler-Stalin Pact to lead a final third camp, split with Max Schachmann, arguing that under Stalin and Soviet Union had become undifferentiable from state capitalism. Elements of this split were later to reemerge under social democratic control as the Students for Democratic Society that was pitted in phony right versus left conflicts with Buckley's Young Americans for Freedom. Burnham himself went on to join the newly formed Office of Strategic Studies, where he researched post-war Soviet diplomatic objectives for use by President Franklin Roosevelt, Alger Hiss, and others at Yalta. After the war, Burnham served as a conduit for tactical formulations on behalf of Atlanticist America Century Doctrine in conservative State Department, CIA, and military layers. In 1947, the same week that the first salvo of this monetarist war upon humanity was fired with the announcement of the Truman Doctrine, Burnham launched a polemic against Taft Republicans. The struggle for the world, opening with the declaration that the Third World War began in April 1944, Burnham went on to argue. The discovery of the atomic weapon has brought about a situation in which Western civilization can continue to exist only if an absolute monopoly in the control of atomic weapons is created, which can be gained and exercised only through a world empire. The United States cannot help building an empire. His 1950 book, The Coming Defeat of Communism, was a printout for Atlanticist hardliners' preventative war plans in Korea, especially serving a how-to book for an offensive political subversion war using Nazi Interpol units to destabilize Eastern Europe. And finally, in 1953, Burnham fully embraced the insane policies of the Dulles brothers in his 1953 book, Liberation or Containment. A term of loathing among our Western European allies whose countries were threatened with thermonuclear incineration as a result of the irresponsible brinkmanship maneuvers that he advocated. Burnham wrote at a time when the ultimate U.S. military strategy in the event of a Red Army attack remained to hold the Pyrenees. The bankruptcy of the Dulles massive retaliation bluff strategy was demonstrated in 1956 as the dust cleared from the Suez Canal crisis and the U.S. paramilitary invasions of Hungary was crushed by Red Army tanks. As Soviet nuclear developments and the accelerating economic collapse signaled by the 1957-58 recession forced Atlanticist policymakers to re-emphasize Fabian networks under a policy of deterrence and fascism with a human face, Burnham would dutifully make yet another turn to support the Kennedy administration, as we shall see later. Frank Meyer, another guy Buckley brought into National Review. Frank Meyer was brought in National Review by Eastman and Burnham almost directly from the Third International Comintern to serve as resident senior theoretician, heading a department appropriately titled Principles and Heresies. Meyer followed much the same route as Burnham from Princeton, 1926, to Balliol College, Oxford. There's always Oxford links in these circles. A lot of Oxford links. In 1932, where he became a protege of British Fabian Society leaders Beatrice and Sidney Webb. He joined the British Communist Party, rising quickly to the Central Committee post. As a graduate student at the Fabian Society's London School of Economics, he was elected president of the Student Union. Meyer redeployed to Rockefeller's University of Chicago, where he soon doubled as the head of the Communist Party USA's Workers' School, the number 2 cadre program for the party, and as a member of CP USA Central Committee. As National Review, Burnham used his Fabian agent training to orchestrate a series of pseudo-intellectual yin and yang disputes between two principal synthetic tendencies that comprise Buckleyite conservatism and libertarians and traditionalists. From its libertarianism, which seeks to resurrect Manchester liberalism as elaborated by such enemies of the American Revolution as intelligence agent Jeremy Bentham and pro-pederast Jeremy Bentham, Parson Malthus, and the Mills, etc., to its traditionalism, which is a hodgepodge of medieval Catholic Kant, Southern agrarianism, etc. It would be E. Michael Jones, Charles Coulomb, etc. Employing as its heroes such reactionary Rothschild agents as Edmund Burke and Clements von Metternich, Buckley conservatism is no more than an encyclopedic listing of 500 years of anti humanist monetarist dogma. When American conservatives openly began to denounce the Tory enterprise in the 1960s, Meyer let a dig in the graveyards of American history to raise up the worst tendencies of federalism. His fusionism drew upon the worst populist tendencies of Jefferson over the full commitment to intellectual industrial development of Washington, Franklin, Hamilton, and Paine, and parsimoniously rehashed the arguments of the Rothschild Southern slaveocracy against Abraham Lincoln, the founders of the Republican Party. And if you look at the direct in these Catholic circles around culture wars, Commonweal, the new Triumph magazine, the old Triumph magazine, there's these books that come out called the Star Spangled Heresy, which Charles Coulomb bases his Star Spangled Crown monarchist book on. Um, you have E. Michael Jones' um, promotion of the David Wemhoff book, based on promoting a campaign against the American, what the hell did they call it? The American exception, where the American Revolution was good, the French Revolution bad. This was something that was promoted by Time Life magazine. What's actually a hidden fact is that both the American Revolution and the French Revolution was good. The initial stage of the French Revolution was led by pro Bourbon forces that were eventually attacked by the Duke of Orleans, controlled by um, the Grand Orient Freemasonry, and it's Duke of Orleans that actually storms the Bastille, and this is something that E. Michael Jones covers up. The initial tennis court oath was "Hail to the King." What was the problem with the French Revolution is that the aristocracy and the clergy were equalized in the secular government to the common person, and this would have necessitated the education of the common person, which the aristocracy and some aspects of the clergy did not want, um, because they're anti-humanist, they're anti-Christian humanist. But generally, the Bourbons and supporters of the Ecole Polytechnique, like Jean-Baptiste Colbert, other individuals did want an educated populace because it would have made France the great economic power which could have smashed the British Empire. And this is uh, the general geopolitical worldview. Anybody that supports or talks about geopolitics is supporting the British policy. This is the same thing with Alexander Dugin of smashing Central European industrialism and developing industrialism in the third world. Um, that's really the main goal. Uh, but yeah, all these books, all anti-American garbage that, if you actually look into, is deployed on the basis of, like I said, smashing American industrialism, smashing the stability of the American state. Has nothing to do with Catholic theology, has nothing to do with being a good person, has nothing to do with morality. Of these two synthetic tendencies that were merged to create National Review, libertarianism is far by the most significant. It was initially revived as an international Fabian deployment by Walter Lippmann with the publication of his book, The Good Society, in 1937. In the founding of the International Center for the Renovation of Liberalism in France, the following year after the war, Friedrich August von Hayek, then at the London School of Economics, was deployed by the Webbs to carry on the project creating the Mont Pelerin Society. Oh, gee. As an international form of libertarianism. By 1947, Hayek was a product of the stillborn Austrian School of Economics in Vienna, controlled by Otto Habsburg, which not coincidentally is also the headquarters of Rockefeller's Interpol and source of the putrescent academic quackery known as logical positivism, which is properly traced to the most syphilitic features of the late Habsburg dynasty. The Austrian school's founder, Karl Menger, argued that the man's freedom is a totally subjective matter arising from choices that he makes out of ignorance of what his exact biological needs are. For applying this banana theory of economics to the business cycle, Hayek eventually received the Nobel Prize for Economics, in what was undoubtedly the worst decision since the award was granted to the notoriously muddled Keynesian Paul Samuelson. In fact, both Hayek, who claimed that the 1930 Depression would have been avoided simply by maintaining a tight money policy, and Keynes, who called for a solution to the Depression through government spending on all liquid assets on corporatist slave labor programs, and merely two sides of the same debased monetarist coin, most clearly represented in the New York and London dictated policies pursued by Nazi finance minister and hero of E. Michael Jones, Hjalmar Schacht. Since the level of austerity and destruction of capital imposed by fascist Schacht in Germany were not possible either in Britain or the United States, the Webbs put Hayek on ice at the London School for a duration of the Depression, awaiting his post-war export to U.S., where Keynesianism and the New Deal were at that time thoroughly discredited. The connection of the Lippmann Hayek monetarist quackery and the terror networks run by the Buckleys is seen in the methods of its actual application by such Buckleyites as Milton Friedman, who won the franchise for the Rockefeller Chicago School of Economics, where Hayek was eventually resettled, to ram through Friedman's shock treatment austerity measures, which have caused untold human misery and destruction, notably in Chile and Brazil. Interpol death squads terrorized and ravaged the population to crush opposition in Friedman's policies. In these and other countries run on Friedman's model, human labor power has been systematically grouped up to support the bloated debt structure of the Rockefellers' tottering American empire. Okay, what a mouthful. Yeah, sorry, they're Boogaloo Crusader. I'm glad you checked in though. Everybody give a like and subscribe. Give a big D production like to my video. Um, no, S90, they don't enjoy. Atlanticist was a term that came out of um, a lot of the French circles. It's a European term. I don't like to use it. So, uh, anyway, we're going on to the next because that's the end of this article. We're going on to the third article. Hope you liked it. And I only see one more like. There better be more. There's 5 people here. Give me a like, or I'm going to sit here and do this. Come on, let's do it. Look, these videos don't get watched if I don't get likes. YouTube puts them into the trash bin. This is right next to those animated finger songs that are made by computer algorithms um, from Chinese and Indian YouTubers. If you don't, yeah, there we go. There we go. They like the finger song. Here is finger. Here's. It's not CGI though, so it's not so good. I also want to. I want to be at least next to poorly animated Shrek breakdancing song. So thank you for the 4 likes. It's great. We'll see you on the other side, folks. Okay.